Please welcome to the podium, President of Georgetown University, John J. DeGioia.
Well, thank you all for being here this evening. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural event of our Center on Faith and Justice here at Georgetown, a new center we launched this fall, led by our colleague, Reverend Jim Wallis. And I'd like to express my gratitude to the Honorable Raphael Warnock and the Honorable Terri Sewell for their presence and their participation in tonight's conversation. It is a privilege to welcome you to Georgetown University. And I also wish to thank Dean Maria Canchun, our colleagues at the McCourt School of Public Policy and our Center on Faith and Justice for their efforts to launch this new center and to bring us together for this inaugural gathering. As the oldest Catholic and Jesuit institution in the United States, located here in our nation's capital, we have a special opportunity to contribute to civic life. When we founded the McCourt School of Public Policy in 2013, we were able to realize this responsibility in new ways. And today, we take another step in advancing our commitment to this work. This is a responsibility that goes back to the earliest days of the Jesuits. Our colleague and Jesuit historian, Father John O'Malley, emeritus professor in our Department of Theology, reminds us of the foundational influence of Cicero's De Officiis, often translated as on public responsibility, and the influence of this document on St. Ignatius of Loyola and the first Jesuits. Father O'Malley identifies a passage that has particular resonance in our tradition, and I quote, "We are not born for ourselves alone. We, too, as human beings, are born for the sake of other human beings, that we might be able mutually to help one another. We ought, therefore, to contribute to the common good of humankind by reciprocal acts of kindness, by giving and receiving from one another, and thus by our skill, our industry, and our talents, work to bring human society together in peace and harmony." Close quote. Father O'Malley calls this the foundation of a civic spirituality. And in the tradition upon which our university is built, we acknowledge that we have a civic commitment to seek the common good, that there is a good we can achieve together that we could never hope to achieve alone. We're honored to be able to advance our contribution to this idea of civic spirituality through this new center and with the leadership of our longtime colleague, Reverend Jim Wallis, who has been appointed director of the center and our inaugural chair in Faith and Justice at our McCourt School. Reverend Wallis is the founder of Sojourners, the Christian social justice organization, where he served as president and editor-in-chief for 5 decades, helping to shape national dialogue on Christian perspectives in social justice. The author of 12 books, including Rediscovering Values, A Guide to Economic and Moral Recovery, On God's Side, What Religion Forgets and Politics Hasn't Learned About Serving the Common Good, and America's Original Sin. He has taught classes at our McCourt School for a number of years and has served as a research fellow at our Berkeley Center since 2010. He's also served on the White House Advisory Council on faith-based and neighborhood partnerships, and for his many years of leadership, we recognized him with an honorary degree at Georgetown in 2007. We are honored that he has taken on this new role as director of our Center on Faith and Justice and our inaugural chair in Faith and Justice. He will guide the center in its work as it seeks to foster a deeper understanding of the intersection between faith and public policy, The center will help us to engage the resources of our faith traditions in civic life, politics, and policy, focusing attention on issues such as racism, poverty, peace and justice, and will complement the long-standing efforts across our institution. With great anticipation and excitement for its future work, we launch the center this evening with this gathering on voting rights, race, and religion. It's now my pleasure to turn this over to Jim and to our two distinguished guests. Jim?
Look at all of you. I want to start by thanking Jack DeGioia, President and friend, for those very kind words. And I've been so honored to come more fully into this wonderful Georgetown community with my appointment to that new chair of Faith and Justice at the McCourt School of Public Policy. Dean Kanchan, great to see you tonight. And founding director of Georgetown University's Center on Faith and Justice. The two favorite words of my life are faith and justice. And now they're in a chair and a center. What could be better than that? And I also want to thank our event co-sponsor, the Berkeley Center, where I started a long time ago here, and the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, my friend John Carr and all the others over there, and Georgetown University's Office of Mission and Ministry. So I look forward to lots of collaboration with you and many other people who've been so kind in welcoming me to this new perch and new venue. As we heard already from Jack and Father O'Malley, as a Jesuit institution, Georgetown is grounded, I'll use that word, grounded, in a 500-year tradition dedicated to introducing students to the depths of Christian social teaching. And one of the Spirit of Georgetown values is, I love this phrase, faith that does justice. They have banners that say that here. And I love walking to my class under that banner, faith that does justice. So I know I'm at the right place to begin this center. Connecting faith and justice is what I've tried to do my whole life. And to address the challenges we face right now that we were talking about back in the green room, we're going to have to go deeper than partisan politics. So I'm saying don't go right, don't go left, go deeper. Go deeper. We have to connect our faith with the justice that we seek. More than ever before, faith and justice must be integral. I would say inseparable, dependent on one another in our message and our practice. These two words, faith and justice, are indeed and must be integral. Without one, the other is incomplete. Each absent of the other is missing a key ingredient. Think about it. Without justice, faith becomes self-serving, only personal, and even private. It becomes tribal instead of universal. And without faith, justice can be reduced to anger, retribution, and revenge for one group over another. These are the issues that will be core to the work and vocation of this new center on faith and justice. So tonight is our launch event. I'm glad to see you all here. I am very happy that this is happening, even in our still post-COVID world. This is the first event of what we will be calling our Faith and Justice Forums. We're going to have more of these. This sort of event we hope to become known for across Georgetown, but also in this nation's capital, across the country, and even globally. And for our first event, we've chosen to focus on voting rights. Voting rights. Why? Because voting rights, hear me now, is the critical issue that will impact and determine every other issue we care about. Like poverty, racial justice, policing, peacemaking, climate change, immigration reform, and gun control, just to name a few. You can see that in the fight for voting rights, everything is at stake. I'll say it again. In the fight for voting rights, everything is going to be at stake. Not just equal citizenship, but the very future of democracy in this country. And I want to say tonight that voting rights must be named also as a faith issue, even a test of faith. In this year alone, 2021, lawmakers in 49 states across the country have introduced 425 bills to restrict voter access. Get that now, 49 states, 425 bills. My friends, something is going on. Something is going on here. In 30 of those 425 attempts to curtail voting rights, they've already succeeded. Now listen carefully. These new laws will shorten the windows during which one can vote, make it harder to remain on absentee voter lists, limit ballot drop boxes, impose strict signature requirements, expand voter purges, reduce the hours and locations of polling places, and even ban the act of providing water and snacks to people lining up to vote. And you and I both know where there are long lines to vote and where there are not. Some of these laws even give state legislatures and judges the right to overturn the results of local elections. State legislatures and judges can overturn local elections all over the country in these new laws. This is unprecedented partisan grab for power, which we have never seen before. Now, what's going on? I'll say this. Many of us believe that the restriction of voting rights is part of a strategy to protect white supremacy in the United States. A strategy that includes racially and politically motivated gerrymandering, blocking comprehensive immigration reform, mass incarceration, voter suppression, and a naked appeal to white Christian nationalism, which this faith leader is going to name as a sin. Can I get an amen to that? Together, these efforts make up a strategy to prevent demographic shifts happening in our country from being reflected in our representative democracy. Here's the key. The strategy is to prevent changing demography from changing democracy. Let me say it again. The strategy is to prevent the changes in our demography from changing our democracy. That is the point, that is their intent, that is what they're trying to do. To put it even more bluntly, to ensure that white minority rule continues, despite America becoming an ever more diverse nation. Now, I want to say at the opening of this Center of Faith and Justice that this threat to democracy is even more than just a question of equal citizenship or politics. Rather, it is deeply moral, religious, and even a theological matter. Let me say why. If we believe that we are all made in Imago Dei, the image of God, then denying someone the right to vote is silencing their God-given voice. To suppress a vote on the basis of skin color is a literal assault on Imago Dei. It's throwing away the image of God. So this is not just a partisan tactic, but rather a denial of their Imago Dei, a theological, biblical, and I would say spiritual offense to God. Voter suppression, theologically, is therefore a sacrilege. And to put these two together, faith and justice, is essential for us now. We're saying tonight that voter suppression is a test of both democracy and faith. There is a battle raging for the soul of this nation. And the battle is about the very question that Dr. King and countless others in the civil rights movement have asked. Is this country truly willing to become a multiracial democracy? I believe we have not yet answered that question. The question remains, are we willing, with all that we say and do, to allow this country to become a multiracial democracy? Or as my dear friend and mentor Vincent Harding pointedly asked, is America possible? Is America possible? So to help us talk more deeply about this issue, I am honored, and I'll say we are blessed tonight to be joined by two of the most important leaders on voting rights in America today. Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock. I really love calling you Senator. No, I really do that. That's new. I never did that before. My reverend friend, now Senator, grew up in Caton Homes Public Housing in Savannah, born one of 12 brothers and sisters raised in coastal Georgia. His father, a veteran small businessman and preacher, grew up in Burke in Screven County, Georgia. Senator Reverend Warnock's mother grew up in Waycross, Georgia, where she spent summers picking tobacco and cotton. A graduate of Savannah's Saul C. Johnson High School, Senator Raphael Warnock's mother and extended family still live in the Savannah area. Senator Warnock is a proud graduate of Morehouse College, where they say Morehouse man. After graduating from Morehouse, he went on to earn a PhD and began his career ordained in the ministry. For 15 years, Senator Warnock has served as senior pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, Georgia. Former pulpit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Raphael Warnock is the youngest pastor ever selected to serve that role in that historic church. Senator Warnock was elected as a Democrat to the United States Senate in January 5th, 2021 special election runoff. He took the oath of office on January 20th, 2021. Congresswoman Terri Sewell is in her sixth term representing Alabama's 7th congressional district. She is one of the first women ever elected to Congress from Alabama in her own right, and the first black woman to ever serve in the Alabama congressional delegation. For Congresswoman Sewell, the fight for voting rights has always been personal, has it not? Growing up in Selma, Alabama, and attending the historic Brown Chapel AME Church, she didn't have to read about the civil rights movement in history books. The foot soldiers of the movement were her neighbors, fellow worshipers, her high school principal, and even her babysitter. As the lead sponsor of H.R. 4, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, Congresswoman Sewell is proud to be leading the fight for voting rights in the House of Representatives. A daughter of Alabama's rural black belt, Congresswoman Sewell was the first black valedictorian of Selma High School. She is an honors graduate of Princeton University and Oxford University and received her law degree from Harvard. So, my friends, given their voting schedules even today, we are honored and blessed to have them here with us tonight. Help me welcome to the stage Senator Warnock. So, here we are. Get your water. We're going to talk for a while. I'm really glad you're all here. Coming out in these days is often a challenge. But I'm grateful that you came to talk about these events. First, let's talk about what's happening around the country. Then we'll get to Washington, okay? It's around the country and then Washington. So, Senator Warnock, both in substance and in symbol, I would say, you represent this battle for the soul of the nation. You've come literally from the pulpit and the streets to the podiums of power in Washington. That's where you've come from. So let's start with what's happening in your home state of Georgia, where this is raging. A raft of voter restrictions are so many it's hard to know where to look. Which of these restrictions that you're facing in Georgia are most significant, and what is the biggest threat to voting rights right now, both in your state and around the country? I would say, what does this signify, a word that you know the importance of?
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm a Baptist preacher. Let the church say amen. It's wonderful, first of all, Jim, to be here with you, to be here as a part, just to play a part in this inaugural event for the Georgetown Center on Faith and Justice. I like that also. And it's great to be here with Congresswoman Sewell, a child of Selma, reared right there in the center of it all at Brown Chapel, AME Church. When I think of that, I think of John Lewis and Bloody Sunday and the bridge that leads us to the possibilities of the future. Great to be here with Congresswoman Sewell and to be here with you, Reverend Wallis. We've been in some good trouble together before.
Indeed.
And I'm going to answer your question, but Jim Wallis is an evangelical in the best sense of the word. That is to say that he understands that faith at its best deals with the slavery of sin and the sin of slavery. That it deals both with soul bondage and systemic bondage, and that's been your vocation for so long. And I heard you were retired. I've discovered that you were rewired for such a time. Let's hear it again for Jim Wallis. What was your question? I'm kidding. Listen, seriously, what's going on in Georgia and all across our country is very serious. It is an all-out, unabashed assault on our democracy. And those of us who believe in democracy have to take up this fight. And so I'm deeply honored to be in this struggle with you, to fight for our country, to fight for our democracy, because I believe in democracy. I believe that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea. This notion that all of us have within us a spark of the divine, and so we ought to have a voice in determining, helping to determine the direction of our country and our destiny within it. And there are many terrible provisions in SB 202 down in Georgia, but I'll just select one. One is the ability of partisan state actors to swoop down into local elections and without any good cause, take over the elections. Mm-hmm. And so I have a provision in the Freedom to Vote Act called the Preventing Election Subversion Act of 2021. Mm-hmm. And it would prevent partisan actors at the state level from swooping down and taking over elections. What we are witnessing right now, folks, is democracy in reverse. Instead of the people being able to pick their politicians, the politicians are trying to pick their people through partisan gerrymandering, through this ability to subvert elections, through this ability to have endless challenges. You can have in Georgia right now, based on the provisions in SB 202, your neighbor can challenge everybody on their street, everybody in their community, and all of those things have to be chased down, sowing the seeds of chaos in our democracy. And it is a moral question. It is an emergency, and that's why I'm so very focused, because I think that there are a lot of things we need to do in the Congress, this 117th Congress, but the most important thing we can do this Congress is to pass voting rights, and I won't rest until we do it.
Because, as you just pointed out, we can out-organize, out-mobilize around lots of these acts of voter suppression, but not the one that allows them to overturn local elections. So right. Picking that out, to me, is critical. Congresswoman, you're from Selma. You're from Selma. And you represent Montgomery and Birmingham, the cradle, as we say, of the Civil Rights Movement, and that bridge, Edmund Pettus Bridge, where the drama was fought. And those foot soldiers were your neighbors and fellow worshipers. So from where you are sitting, and you're chair of the Voting Rights Caucus, from where you're sitting, why are some people wanting to go backward instead of forward, and what is the biggest threats you see right now?
Well, I too want to join Senator Warnock in thanking you, Jim, for this invitation, and you, Jack, for choosing Jim to be the first executive director of the Center for Faith and Justice. I couldn't think of a better person to lead this, and so thank you for this invitation. I also can't imagine being on a stage with two religious people, both pastors, and have to say anything. So, but Senator Warnock has been, they get paid to do that. I mean. Senator Warnock, I know. Senator Warnock, I love calling you that, but I love to say the Right Honorable Reverend Senator Warnock. It's a pleasure to have you in the United States Congress, and we must keep him in the United States Senate. Now, as it was said, I grew up in Selma, Alabama. My babysitter was Cheyenne Webb Kreisberg, who was 8 years old and sitting on the knee of Reverend Martin Luther King, literally the morning of the march. And she was my babysitter. My dad was a high school basketball coach. My mom was the first black woman to be on the city council in Selma. And for those who knew my mom, they know that she was the real congresswoman from Alabama, if you know what I mean. And when you think about the threats that are currently facing us in this nation, I would say that there are three threats. First, voter suppression. Secondly, apathy, voter apathy. And third, political will. Let me start with the first. Voter suppression is the systematic threat of the democracy and the vote by some so that they would actually seek to discriminate, pick winners and losers, if you will, at the ballot box, who gets to go and vote. It's unacceptable. And we heard, you gave us all the statistics, 425 pieces of legislation in 49 states just this summer, and 33 of them into law, the most pernicious being in Georgia, I think, as you rightfully pointed out. So voter suppression is the name of the game. And what's sad about it is that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was reauthorized 5 times. Most recently, in 2006, for 25 years, under Republican President George W. Bush. It passed out of the Senate in 2006, 98-0. Voting rights, especially among the elected officials, should not be a partisan issue. We should all want, especially as elected officials, our constituents and the people to vote. After all, the vote is your voice in this democracy. Secondly, apathy. When we stay home and don't vote, others win. Mm-hmm. Our voice is squelched. That vote matters. If you don't think that vote matters, ask the voters of Georgia, who delivered to this great Senate 2 Democrats, one a Jewish man and one a black man. Georgia. I'm from Alabama, and as you know, I'm the only member of Alabama's delegation that's of color, and the only Democrat. So I know. My dad would say, it's okay to stand alone if you're standing up for what you believe is right. So I never feel alone in that delegation. But I want you to know that your apathy, voter apathy, is a threat to our democracy. Right. And then lastly, political will. The reality is that the House of Representatives already passed H.R. 1, the For the People Act. I know it has been revised and I think reformed by this Freedom to Vote Act that's currently in the Senate. And then H.R. 4, which is the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that I was so proud to introduce, not just this Congress, but every Congress since 2013. First time, this time without John Lewis. But I know that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 must be fully restored. The full protections of the Voting Rights Act, because it's still there. It's just the teeth of it. Section 5, pre-clearance, is really inoperable unless you have a Section 4, which was found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Section 4 is the formula to determine which states are the most egregious actors and therefore must pre-clear all of their voting laws before they go into effect. You can't unring the bell. So pre-clearance is very important. And so that's what H.R. 4 does, or S4 as it's over in the Senate. And when I say political will, I'm talking about the filibuster. Because the reality is, that's a procedure. If I'm right, I think I am right. I know I'm right.
You're right.
That is a procedure. That's a procedure that the party in charge determines what the procedures of the House and the Senate will be. We have to demand of our political leaders, especially since our vote matters, and you've given that vote to Democrats, both in the House, the Senate, and the White House, that we have the political will to move aside a procedure to do what is right. And what is right is to give a voice to this legislation on the Senate floor. You know, cloture, this filibuster is about whether or not they can even take up voting rights on the Senate floor. And the fact that we had a vote, was it last week? And only 51 people, 51 senators, only one Republican, Senator Murkowski from Alaska, joined with Democrats to even give the Voting Rights Act, John Lewis's Voting Rights Advancement Act, an opportunity to be debated and a fair vote. So political will is something that you all can help us with, and I hope that you will. We have to demand of our elected officials, demand of our senators and our members of the House that they do what is right.
So what you're hearing and what we're seeing can be put like this. Instead of voters choosing their politicians, we could have politicians choosing their voters. Now, Stacey Abrams said this quite well, and this campaign going on around the country is often being led by black women like Stacey. Here's what she said, listen carefully now. Voter suppression is no longer billy clubs and hoses and dogs. It's administrative rules. It's bureaucratic barriers. It's precincts that seem to close in the dead of night. Now, you've taken us to Washington from where it's happening around the country, and you've mentioned this filibuster thing. Now, Senator, when you gave your first speech on the Senate floor, I loved watching it because I heard you preach so often. I said, they're learning there's a preacher in the House. Not the House, but the Senate. You talked about this is Jim Crow in new clothes. You said that in your first sermon on the Senate floor. Now, you have been working with fellow senators to talk about whether or not we're going to let this procedure. From what we're seeing, we're not going to get 10 Republicans to vote for voting rights, the 60. Therefore, we have this problem called the filibuster. How do we deal with that in the Senate? How do we deal with this barrier to having a law that overturns all these things happening in the country, which are clearly wrong? How do we deal with that?
Well, let me be clear, and I've been consistent on this point. We have to pass voting rights no matter what. Absolutely. And we can't allow anything to get in the way of doing what is necessary to preserve the sanctity of our democracy. And so when I came to the Senate, you know, everybody kept asking me about the F word. And
the F word, right?
Filibuster.
You know, and I have to push back a bit because folks kept asking me about the filibuster, and I began to say to the media, instead of asking me about that, why don't you ask the folks on the other side of the aisle why they are against having a debate on voting rights? They were so easily just letting them off of the hook. Yeah. And you know, I'm a preacher. It's never too late to get saved, to get religion. And they could still vote to let us have a debate because that's what they blocked. And I want you to be really clear about that. They have voted 3 times this Congress to block us from being able to have a debate on voting rights. They didn't vote the bill down. They voted the ability for us to get on the bill to have a debate. And this last time we presented the Freedom to Vote Act, which I and others wrote. Senator Manchin and I are all in the same room. So voting rights, let me be clear, voting rights in the minds of many was dead in June when they voted against our ability to have a debate. But I was not about to let it die. And I'm grateful for the voices of so many. I'm so proud of those legislators from Texas who came and held vigil, having to literally run from their colleagues to break quorum to say that it's that important. And they left their families and friends and missed all kinds of events and things happening in their own lives and held vigil. What courage. And I began to say to my colleagues, we need a little bit of that courage in the United States Senate because voting rights is what's at stake. And so we will keep working on this. When they blocked our ability to even have a debate on this in June, you remember, if you watch what was going on in the Capitol and in the media, there was this pivot towards infrastructure. And I'm for infrastructure. I'm glad that bill got signed a couple of days ago, and we got another one we need to sign. I'm for infrastructure, but we can do infrastructure and the infrastructure of our democracy. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so we insisted that we couldn't allow voting rights to die. Right. And because of that advocacy, because I went to leadership, pastor of the church where Martin Luther King Jr. served, John Lewis as pastor, son of a mother who grew up in Waycross, Georgia in the 50s. I bring that experience, it's in my bones, I bring it to this work. And I insisted that we had to stay focused on voting rights. And as a result of that, 8 of us got in a room and we wrote the Freedom to Vote Act. Senator Manchin and I are co-authors of that. He was never on for the people. He's a co-author of the bill. And it's a compromise bill, but it is what we need. It's strong. It is not a weak bill. It's a strong bill. And it's a fair bill. But what we've said to our Republican colleagues is, if you don't like what we presented, fine, let's have a debate. We've offered them endless amendments. You can offer as many amendments as you want. Let's talk about it. And here's the thing that's really strange, Jim. People talk about how divided our country is. Have you thought about this? Both Democrats and Republicans are saying that there's something broken in our democracy. Democrats, how we frame the argument is different, but both Democrats and Republicans are saying that there's something wrong, there's something broken, there's something awry in the democracy. Well, if Democrats and Republicans, both on the left and the right, agree that there's something broken in the democracy, how could we not have a debate about it in the United States Senate? And so that's what's at stake. We'll keep pushing the issue, but I think history will judge us harshly, and it should, if we don't find a way to get voting rights done. And I can't speak for the 99, I can speak for the 1. I won't rest. I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure that we understand how important this moment is, because here's my fear. I think for folks who've been around for a while, who've been in office for a while, you see a lot of fights, and you win some, you lose some. I get it, that's how democracy works. But I think there's a danger that you can be lulled into thinking, well, we didn't get it this time, we'll come back next year. Right. Here's the thing, I think that when you look at hundreds of bills introduced in 49 states, dozens already passed, all of these audits, 1/3 of the country saying that the president isn't legitimate. I think when you look at all of these things put together, if we don't find a way to do something about this, we may well have crossed a Rubicon that will make it difficult for us to set things right for another generation. And so we've got to do everything we can. We've got to pass both of these bills. Yeah. We got to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, and we have to pass John Lewis. The democracy is in a 911 emergency. And the Freedom to Vote Act puts the fire out that's burning right now, the fires that began to rage after January the 6th, puts the fire out. And it's not, it is, all it does is it provides a baseline of minimal standards for elections. That's all it does. The states and the local officials are still in charge of the election. Don't let anybody tell you differently. It just says that in America, people have to have access to the ballot. So that means voting should be a federal holiday. Sounds good to me. That means that weekend voting, that means that weekend voting ought to be a part of any federal election. It means that you got to provide 15 days of early voting. It means you got to have enough drop boxes. It means that you got to have no fault vote by mail. It means that partisan actors can't just swoop in and nullify what the electorate has already decided to do, because the four most powerful words in a democracy are "the people have spoken." And we've got to be clear at the end of the election that it's the people who've been doing the speaking. And so we've got to have the Freedom to Vote Act, because that puts the fire out. John Lewis, which is just a reauthorization of the old 1965 voting rights law, is about building a fire station for future fires, so that states that have a history of voter suppression are held accountable. And guess what? If you, over time, show that that's not who you are, that you got religion now, that that you're a new creation, if you demonstrate that, you're no longer under preclearance.
Right.
Here's the thing, if we had preclearance in place right now, SB 202 in Georgia wouldn't even be on the books, because it would have had to pass through the Justice Department.
So let's get religion here. Now I want to make it, this is the first Faith and Justice Forum, and we're talking politics and Democrats and Republicans. And I want to say that on these issues, we've got to go deeper than that, because we've got to get to the place that's deeper than a broken system. You said it was 98-0 in 2006,
right.
Republicans and Democrats. Republicans consistently voted for the extension of the Voting Rights Act again and again, and now they're not. So this is not just partisan or politics. And universities are nervous about that kind of talk, as are churches. So I'm saying this is deeper than politics. You have both spoken. You use the word sacred, both of you, in your talk about voting rights. Why is this sacred? Because that's the only way we're going to get beyond just the partisan fight. How do we take this to a deeper level of our broken system, where democracy is at stake, but so is our faith at stake here? Why do you think voting is sacred? That's what you say.
Yeah, I mean, look, John would always say that. John Lewis, if you can, he gave us the roadmap. And I sometimes get very discouraged about the infighting, especially over voting rights, given the history of under three Republican presidents, it was reauthorized. 3. George W. Bush came, along with Barack Obama, to Selma for the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March. He and Laura were there because he was proud that under his administration, they reauthorized the Voting Rights Act.
That's right.
It's sacred because it's revered. It's something that is fundamental to our democracy. At the end of the day, our democracy, this Constitution, this exercise in form of government, if you will, the base of that is the right to vote. Mm-hmm. It's fundamental. As John would say, it's almost sacred.
And you've called it a prayer. Voting is like a prayer, right?
Yeah, I've said that a vote is a kind of prayer for the world we desire for ourselves and for our children. I believe that it is sacred, because at root, the vote is about your voice, and your voice is about your human dignity. And we have to stand up for that. We'll disagree on a whole range of subjects. Mm-hmm. And, I'm glad to be at Georgetown, because, I can talk in these terms. Of course, it doesn't matter to me where I am. I'm still a preacher. I can't help it. But, and Jim, you understand this, the root understanding of salvation in the ancient texts is literally the broadening of communal space. That's what salvation means. Mm-hmm. And that gets lost in a world where we have so privatized religion that it becomes insular and siloed and disengaged. But to the ancient Hebrews, I'm thinking about that text in Exodus where God says, I have seen the suffering of my people. I have seen what their taskmasters in Egypt are doing. I have heard their cry, and I have come down to deliver them out of Egypt, he says, into the good and spacious land. Into the good, a land that is good and it is spacious. It is a land where everybody can breathe. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And voting rights are preservative of all other rights. Voting rights are what, voting rights, the ability to vote checks the excesses of those who are in power. It checks tyranny. It is, if we weren't able to stand up in Georgia and vote, we wouldn't have been able to pass the expanded child tax credit, which cuts child poverty in our country in half. Voting did that. Mm-hmm. We don't get a chance to fight against climate change, which is an existential threat. We don't get to deal with the issue of poverty. So it is sacred. It's about the broadening of communal space. And so for me, this is deeper than any kind of partisan political argument. I sit here knowing that you won't win all the fights. But that idea of one person, one vote, that's the covenant that we have with one another as an American people. And we ought to defend it with all our might.
Which connects to other things here at Georgetown about Imago Dei, image of God, and the common good. The common good is what's important here. And you kind of got your calling to politics at Brown Chapel, where I have also been to preach, where you heard a president come and talk, President Obama, and that really certified your calling in public life. So you're taking this now to a deeper level than just our usual media coverage, Democrat, Republican, left and right. Until we take this to a deeper level, we're not going to win this battle.
It's not the difference between right and left. It's between right and wrong.
That's right.
It's the ability of people to be heard in their own democracy.
So in a few minutes, we're going to turn to some questions from you in the audience. You'll see 2 microphone stands, I think, in the aisles. If you'd like to ask a question, please line up behind those microphones. In order to get to as many of your questions as we can, please keep your question brief and please stick to just asking a question. Now, as a preacher, let me put it this way. As a preacher, I want to ask that your question be a question and not a sermon. Okay? Questions, not sermons. So get in line, and we're going to let you ask some questions. But before we do that, given that this is more than just politics, but we have to have some political decisions based on the common good. What can be done? I mean, what can be done? We've seen the blocking. Where do the two of you find hope? Where do you get your hope in a battle like this? The strength to continue. And what can these people do? This will not be the last Faith and Justice Forum on voting rights. Just the beginning. What can people like these students, teachers, civic, and faithers do, and non-politicians to protect voting rights? So I guess I'm asking you to feel free to give your altar call now to what you can do.
I find strength from my foremothers and forefathers, because I know that I didn't get here by myself. I know that Amelia Boynton Robinson deserved to be, in 1964, the first black woman to represent Alabama in Congress. But because she could not, but she stood up and voiced and got beaten on a bridge, I get to walk the halls of Congress. And, you know, Amelia was my special guest at the State of the Union in 2015. And some people have heard me tell this story, but I just want to remind you, when you ask, where do I get my strength? When I'm tired, I pass by that glorious picture of Shirley Chisholm in the nation's capital. And she has that the hand pointed. And I think to myself, I should be no ways tired, because she fought the fight. She fought the fight. Amelia Boynton Robinson would often say, and when she came to Washington on the eve of the State of the Union and had a chance to meet Barack Obama, we were off in this little vestibule off of Congress waiting for Barack Obama to come, and everyone to a person said the same thing to her. "Oh, Miss Amelia, I stand on your shoulders. Oh, Miss Amelia, I wouldn't have been here." And she was 103 at that point. 103, precious cargo. Probably the oldest person alive at that point. She's no longer with us, but in 2015 she was there. And so when every person would come up and say the same thing, finally, when one person, the last person said, "I stand on your shoulders," she said, "Get off my shoulders." All of you, do your own work.
I love it.
I have that posted on, do your own work. So I find inspiration, I have it on my, on a post-it on my bathroom wall in Birmingham, Alabama. And it reminds me every day that I gotta what? Do my own work.
Okay. Get off the shoulders, do your own work. Let's start there. A lot of us are involved in this. Barbara Williams Skinner, right here. Stand up, Barbara. We're doing a campaign called Faith United to Protect Democracy.
Yes.
Faith Democracy. We're going to talk more about this here at Georgetown. And I love the long lines. We won't get to all of you tonight, but we're going to get to these things in the coming months. So I'd like to take some questions. Again, the preacher's saying, make it a question, not a sermon. Let's go for this side, then this side here. Over here, first question. And if you could tell us who you are, your name, your major, maybe here at Georgetown, that'd be great.
Great. Thank you, guys. My name is Pratik. I'm a first year in the college studying government from New Jersey. And so my question is, Father, you spoke about how voting rights is so fundamental because of all the things that we will be able to achieve once we have a healthy democracy, immigration, gun control, things like that. My concern is that that won't be enough. And so I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts as to whether we need other institutional reforms in addition to the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act.
Good question. Who'd like to take that?
Well, of course we do. And, you know, our democracy has always been a work in progress. I think it's important, even as we think about what's happening in this moment, to recognize that the ways in which there's a strand in our history that's suspicious of democracy. Like I sit in a body that wasn't always popularly elected. There was a time in order to be a senator, the folks in the state legislature sent senators to the upper chamber. What's that stake in? It's a sense of that's the upper chamber. Certain kind of folks are supposed to be there. And we can't trust that power to the masses. You know, women had to fight for their right to vote. It stood up in the 1920s. You know, black folk had to fight for their right to vote. The immigration question is pushing us in other directions to consider the ways in which to consider seriously what it means to be a democracy that embraces all of us, regardless of race or where we're from. And so, of course, there will be a need to address our democracy and find ways to extend it and make it healthy so that it embraces all of us. And we're counting on you to be a part of that voice and a part of that work.
Okay, over here.
Hi, my name is Kesley. I'm a freshman in the college studying biology, and I'm from London. And my question is, so in recent conversations I've had, especially with people on the right, they say that the fight about voting rights is not a race issue, it's a partisan issue. But at what point do we just say, it's about keeping marginalized folks like me from the ballot box?
Well, I mean, I think that that's the definition of voter suppression, that the right of every American, just by being an American, to have that fundamental right to vote. And when you come up with laws that pick winners and losers. State of Alabama now, in order to go vote, they have to show a certain ID, and there's only 7 of them or 8 of them listed, and one is a guns license, but not a student license, a student ID. You're picking winners and losers when it comes to that. And so I think we have to call it out. It is both it should never be a partisan issue. It's a democratic, small d, issue. It is. It's fundamental to our democracy and worth fighting for. And so, like Senator Warnock, I hope that you all will be energized from this discussion and realize that your generation should care just as much as my generation and my parents' generation, because old battles have become new again. Who would have ever thought that we would be fighting for reproductive rights? Didn't our mothers get that? I never would have thought that I would first of all, become a member of Congress, but 56 years after John Lewis and Amelia Boynton Robinson and so many others shed blood on a bridge in my hometown, that I would be fighting to restore the Voting Rights Act. Right. Didn't we have that fight? Mm-hmm. Every generation progress is elusive, so every generation must fight to maintain the progress that we have and to advance it.
Last point, every generation defines the new fight. Every one of you. Next question.
Hello. So I'm not going to preach, but my question does need some context. I'm taking this class on African American theology, right? And we're learning about the different civil rights acts and the segregations from slavery and how theology emerged from that. So one of the big questions that emerged from James Cone and African American liberation theology is God black? If God sides with the oppressed, if he sides with those who are down and their backs against the walls, is God a black man?
Isn't it great that James Cone comes up in the voting rights conversation? I love that. Raphael, you can answer that.
Well, since 2 people went to seminary school and 1 went to law school, I'm gonna let y'all answer that.
You and I can have a more extended theological conversation after this meeting. I'll talk about my own book, which you can find on Amazon.com. Look, I come out of a tradition, the black church, and when we say the black church, we've never, ever meant anything racially exclusive about that. It is the anti-slavery church. It is the freedom church. Because there were some who tried to reconcile the irreconcilable. Christian faith and human bondage. And they found all kinds of ways to justify it, both in church canon law, where they said just do it under God, and in civic law. And the legacy of the church that I come out of, that Ebenezer is just a part of, its gift to America is that it has always held vigil to a vision of humanity that embraces all of us. And it did that when in the words of the old spiritual, we couldn't hear nobody pray. We kept the faith, and we believed in what Martin Luther King Jr. would later describe as the beloved community. And so my faith is a freedom faith, and it puts me in the fight, to fight for marginalized people, period, which sometimes comes as a result of skin color, but also if my fight is to be morally grounded, if it's to have moral authenticity and not just be another kind of tribalism, the same faith that causes me to stand up against racism must also drive me to stand up against sexism, against heterosexism, to stand up for members of the LGBTQ+ community, to stand up for the issue of climate change. It is the recognition that our humanity is what's at stake.
In my class here on race, faith, and politics, some of my students are here for that. There you go, there you go. We talked about a Bible, a slaveholder Bible at Fisk University in the library that took the Exodus out of the Bible.
Right.
And took all those scriptures out
Right.
that got people free, right? Because people are afraid of what the Bible says and afraid of what Jesus taught. And so putting stuff back into religion gets taken out to oppress people is in fact what James Cone was all about over here.
So first off, I want to thank you both for being here today. It has been absolutely wonderful being able to hear you speak. But I would like to direct my question to you, Congresswoman. So you said it yourself, you're the only Black woman Democrat representing Alabama right now. That comes with a burden of really representation. So how have you been able to navigate that burden in Congress and in your personal life?
Great question.
Yeah.
You know, Eleanor Roosevelt said that no one can make you feel inferior unless you give them permission. And I try to use my voice, which oftentimes is the only woman's voice in some of these rarefied places. I sit on the Intelligence Committee and on Ways and Means. It's sometimes the only Southern voice. It's sometimes the only Black voice. I can only be authentically who I am, right? My mom used to say, define yourself for yourself because the world will define you by all kinds of different things. So I feel like I have a great foundation growing up in Selma, Alabama, where ordinary people did extraordinary things, changing the world. If you think about it, John Lewis was 21 years old. SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. These were young people who literally had the temerity, the audacity to make this nation live up to its ideals of equality and justice. So I feel like that others have sacrificed for me to earn my seat. My job is to use my voice in that seat and to create more chairs around the table that are filled with people who are women, who you know, from our diverse backgrounds. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that you have to have a strong sense of self, but also know your mission, right? I represent my home district. This district is a district that has 715,000 people. The median income for a family of 4 is $35,000. Wow. I came from that, public school educated. If anyone knows what's possible from my district with resources and opportunities, you're looking at it. But I've got to be willing to fight for the people that I represent so that there are more opportunities and more resources to the people that I represent. Because look what's possible when they have resources, when they have opportunities. So I guess being grounded in a strong sense of self, but also knowing that you are a part of a lineage. I am an inheritor of an awesome legacy that has been paid for by my forefathers and foremothers, that I walk proudly in every door, and I sit in seats to use the voice that God gave me.
So, there you go.
Yeah.
We got a bit of a late start because these two have votes and all that they're doing all the time. And they got more to go back to. But I'm going to trust my friend who knows what's going on to raise his hand when we have to finish here. But that's you. I'm going to give you a few more questions here. And I mean, this center is in business to have interaction with students all the time. So I'd stay here all night doing that. These two can't. I want to be able to send them home as I promised. But can we take a couple more questions? Yeah? Okay. We were over here, back over here.
Whew. Well, wow, this is unreal. First off, thank you both for showing up and just coming out tonight and sharing everything you can with us. So Ernesto Godinez, first year public policy student from Miami, Florida. And my question is, so being a student in Professor Wallis's class, we always discuss the notion of proximity and building relationships with people anywhere and everywhere you can. throughout your time in the political space, can you speak to the importance of your faith in relationship building, and how has that impacted your work in politics?
Well, I've spent my whole career as a pastor. So for me, going into the United States Senate, running for a high office, is a continuation of my lifelong commitment to service. And that service is grounded in my faith. For me, it is reasonable service. It is not special. It's what I'm supposed to do. I had a teacher along the way who told me that service is the rent we pay for the space we occupy. So, you know, for me, I'm continuing to pay the rent. And, you know, pastors stand up on Sunday morning and we welcome whoever comes in. You know, y'all get to pick where you go to worship. But when folks come in, we embrace whoever comes. And so in the United States Senate, I'm clear that I'm not a senator who used to be a pastor. I'm a pastor who happens to serve in the United States Senate. And in the places where I can reach across the aisle, I've done it. Have y'all heard about the Cruz-Warnock Amendment? Yeah, that Cruz. Have you heard about it, the Cruz? So let me tell you about it. You know, when we were passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill, Ted Cruz and I, both serving on the Commerce Committee, needed to get together to get some work done. And I remember the night when it passed the Senate, we were all on the floor. And in order to get this work done, we couldn't get it done in committee, so we had to get it done on the floor. And Ted Cruz stood up and he gave his argument for why we needed this amendment. And then it was my turn to speak. And I heard myself, Jim, say words that I thought I'd never hear myself say. And that is that I want to associate myself with the words of Ted Cruz. And Twitter went crazy. Like, what in the world is this? Well, it's very simple. There's an interstate. There's a highway. There's a road called I-14. And the same highway that runs through Texas runs through Georgia. And we both wanted it to be named a priority corridor so we could get it built out in our state. In my state, it connects communities with important emerging technologies, strengthening the economy, connects our military bases. So I need I-14 in Georgia, and he needs it in Texas.
There you go.
And so we got together, and that's why I do believe in infrastructure, by the way, because, you know, infrastructure for me is just one big home improvement project. Sometimes, you know, when you can't get along in the house, just find something to do. Work, you know, paint the fence. And so we got together, and when when I said I associate myself with the words, I can't even say it again. But when I said that, I mean, my colleagues, you know, I could see them smirking and laughing, and they could not believe it. And the whole chamber kind of broke out in applause and passed the thing by acclamation. I don't know if they even knew what was in it, but they said if Ted Cruz and Raphael Warnock are on the same amendment, we're gonna pass that tonight, right? So the pastor and me, the person of faith, understands that at a level much deeper than partisan politics, there's a road. There's a road that runs through Texas. that also runs through Alabama and runs through Georgia. And that road passes hospitals and schools. It goes through communities that are largely communities of color and white communities, sisters and brothers trying to work at work. It runs past homes where children are doing homework and parents are trying to figure out how they're going to pay the tuition for them to get through college. And my job as a legislator and as a pastor, as a citizen, is to find ways to build out the road that connects our humanity and lifts us to something that Dr. King called the beloved community.
And there is a road that leads to a multiracial democracy that we're all going to have to build. I'm told I got 3 more, and then we'll have a lot more in weeks to come. 1 here, 2, 3. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Alana. I am a graduating senior this December in the School of Foreign Service studying international history. And my question is actually based in history. So do either of you see a similarity between the erosion of voting rights in the past few years in the United States and that of Germany in 1933 to 1936?
Historical parallels.
Yeah.
They're never exact, but they sometimes look like each other.
I think that and folks are writing and talking about this right now, and I think it's important. I think that there are autocratic movements going on right now all over the globe, and we all need to pay attention. I think when problems are big and people are afraid, it leaves open the door for strong men, for folk who stand up and declare, yeah, the country's in trouble, and I'm the only one who can fix it. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. So these kind of autocratic moves are things that I think we all ought to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. I'm always careful about making these parallels, but the other piece that I would underscore is that what happened in Germany in the 1930s, and it's something I have thought about a lot. I wrote a master's thesis as a seminary student comparing the theology and the ministries of Martin Luther King Jr. and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Mm-hmm. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was part of the very little Christian resistance that you got challenging the Third Reich outright. Much of the Christian church during that era basically went along with the Fuhrer. They became Aryan Christians, Reich Christians. And there was one catechism for school children that said, you know, Jesus built for heaven, Hitler built for the German earth. And school children, that was their catechism. And the church didn't stand up. It retreated to a kind of either kind of insular vision that says that's not our business, or they gave over to a kind of Christian nationalism in that context. And the truth is, slavery wouldn't have lasted so long, and segregation wouldn't have been so intractable were it not for the cooperation of people who worship every weekend. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote about that in the letter from a Birmingham jail. He said, when I pass through the South in his own eloquent way and on Alpine Novembers, and I see the South's churches and its expansive educational buildings and its spires that reach heavenward, I ask myself, what kind of people worship there and who is their God? And I think one of the defining moments, one of the defining issues for this moment, which is why this Center for Faith and Justice is so important, because it interrogates us, it challenges us, those of us who are people of faith, it asks us over and over again, I know what you sing about in your hymns, but who and what really is your God?
Mm-hmm. And look up Dietrich Bonhoeffer. When he came to seminary in New York, Union Seminary, he was a white German kid who went to Abyssinian Baptist Church every Sunday. And the black church partly formed who he was when he went back to Germany. Okay, 2 more questions. Here.
Hi, I'm Zoe Wanowich. I'm a freshman in the SFS. First of all, Senator Warnock and Congresswoman Sewell, thank you so much for being here. I think I speak for the whole room when I say we just all feel so lucky to hear you guys speak. My question is, I think in terms of both faith and justice, honesty is a core tenet. So hopefully this doesn't sound like too much of a left field question, but you know, Senator Warnock, you touched on that 1/3 of the country doesn't believe that our president was rightfully elected. At what point would you all say is the line between freedom of speech and you can't yell fire in a crowded theater?
Congresswoman, speak to that one. That's a tough one.
You know, what frightens me the most is the state of disinformation, kind of getting to your point, that people believe because we are getting our information from these silos. And, you know, what is truth? Well, my truth is that as I sat in the gallery on January 6th, and I heard tumultuous sounds of people trying to get into the chamber to nullify an election and to get at and the fact that that was encouraged by those who serve with me, it shook me to my core. Someone asked the question, besides voting rights, what else do we need? We need to think about the institutions that prop up voting, the truth, media, news. I mean, there are checks and balances that have to be there. But they're only, I mean, for certain things, there's only one truth. How I felt about January 6th may be different than what someone else feels about it. But the fact that it happened, and the fact that on our watch it happened, we as a people should feel like we should get to the bottom of it. You may not think that the commission that is currently set up is that right commission to do it, maybe not independent enough. But to not want to know the truth about what happened so that we can make sure it never happens again, that's a problem. And so I don't have an answer, but I agree with you that disinformation, misinformation is dangerous. And I'm saying that from a person who sits on Intel and gets the same presidential briefing that he gets.
There's a reason Jesus said, you'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free. The opposite of that is if you don't know the truth, if you're getting information from these places, you will be in bondage. That's what it means. Last question. You've been great on questions, not sermons, so let's follow the lead here.
Many people believe, as I do, that January 6, 2020 was a dry run for 2024. And not just the lamentable and tragic death and destruction, but the disruption of the certification of the electoral process. We're seeing extremists in 2022 running for secretaries of state, and we know that the integrity of that office is really, really important. And there are movements within swing states, surgically precision states, that are trying to change the way the College of Electors, the Board of is chosen, so that if you can't win with the vote, you can change what happens with the electoral count. Now, I know that's a little in the weeds for some folks, but can you explain what would happen if we did not have a certified election, and how we would then determine the president, and explain what's going on at the state level to disrupt our democratic republic?
I think you've done a pretty good job. I mean, it's very serious. And it's the reason why we've got to pass both of these bills, both the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. There's nothing more precious, folks, than our democracy. And, you know, we have messy arguments. And when it gets real messy, let's, you know, remember that it's the substitute for war. It's the peaceful transfer of power. We should be respectful, but I don't mind that we have loud arguments in America about guns and butter, about how to spend, about taxes, about how to use our resources. And it is the exception rather than the rule. It pushes against the grain of most of human history, where it was simply the folks who were just the strongest who were in charge. And so this is a precious and sacred thing, and I think too many of us perhaps took it for granted. Mm-hmm. And if there could be anything that looks like a silver lining, maybe a lesson, maybe not a silver lining, but a lesson coming out of January 6th, it is the reminder of just how precious this democracy really is, and for all of its faults, for all of its warts, it's the best system we've got, and we need to do everything we can both to improve it, to enhance it, to correct it, and to preserve it.
I didn't come to Georgetown to teach to pass on information, but to try and shape vocations. So when you're walking around this campus, read the banners. Women and men for others, educating the whole person, and serving the common good. Those banners are there to remember those things, and that's why you're here. I want to thank you for coming tonight. I want to thank you for questions, not just sermons. And we're going to bring the questions to us at the Center for Faith and Justice, because we're going to keep talking about all of this. And I'm going to ask, two seminarians on both sides. That's not fair. So I'm going to ask our Congresswoman to give us a benediction, going out. You give us a benediction going out. What do you want these students to do?
I want you to vote, volunteer, organize, turn out, and elect people who will do the right thing.
All right.
Let us thank our guests and thank you all. To be continued.